Hey everyone, I'm Nikhil with Shelf-Esteem. I'm a composer who is also a booktuber. You can find some of my music in The Wheel of Time Season 2, His Dark Material Season 3, and the official Brent Week's companion album for his series Lightbringer. So I wanted to do a tier list video about something I'm really passionate about, which is music. But not just any albums, not just any music, but music for book adaptations. I think, music is kind of the unsung hero sometimes, pun intended, in some of these adaptations. And I kind of wanted to highlight some soundtracks, kind of from best to worst. Really, I mean, a lot of these are fantastic, so I don't think, a lot of these will go in the D category by any means. But yeah, I just kind of wanted to show a little retrospective of some fantastic soundtracks and kind of talk a little bit about why they do justice to either the source material, if I've read the book that it's from, or if they do justice to the show or the film in general. Because sometimes, when you think of things like The Shining by Stephen King, the book and the movie are so different. So it's almost hard to compare. When you look at something like, maybe His Dark Materials, or if you look at something like gosh, maybe like they're a little bit more similar to the source material. Shogun, that's a perfect example. So, then it's a question of which does it do justice to? The medium in which it's written for, which is the film and TV adaptation, or the book, or both. So I thought that would be kind of an interesting exploration we could do. And because I have composed for film and TV that have been adapted, I can kind of speak upon why I think some of these work better than others. So without further ado, let's jump right on in. So Coraline, I have not read the book actually. I've been wanting to read Neil Gaiman's Coraline for a while, and that's definitely on my list. But I'm speaking only in terms of the soundtrack doing justice to the adaptation, which if you haven't seen the film, it is a masterwork. I mean, it is just fantastic. The haunting, subtle textures in that film are just something to really witness. And the soundtrack was done by Bruno Coulet, I believe, who's just a fantastic composer. Some of the most haunting melodies you'll hear, and it's a soundtrack that is heavy with themes, and it is very memorable. So I would say Coraline would go in if I was to move this. Um, I would probably say this would go in the top of A tier for now. So it's not necessarily the most mind-blowing soundtrack, but it is just solid all the way through, and I think it really does justice to the world. So let's leave it there for now, and I'm going to kind of maybe switch these around as I go, just to kind of get a better perspective once I kind of start putting these through. So that was the first one, Coraline. So if you haven't checked out the soundtrack, definitely worth a listen. It's on Spotify, all the streaming platforms and stuff like that. So then the next one is Gone with the Wind. So this is another one that a book by Margaret Mitchell, which I have not read yet, and I have not seen the film yet. So this one I am speaking from a place of just looking at the soundtrack as a whole. And as a listening experience, this soundtrack is chock full of themes. Now, this was done in 1940, and it was done by a composer named Max Steiner, who is one of the goats of that era of film music. He's one of those composers that John Williams, who did Star Wars, E.T., Jurassic Park, will be featured later on in this list, was very influenced by. So he was like a predecessor to John Williams. And Gone with the Wind, I mean, if you listen to the main theme from that, it is a masterwork of like theme cascading into another theme and just a massive sounding orchestra. Like the way that thing is orchestrated is a sight to behold. It just like envelopes you, and it brings you to that time period. It is much more dated than some of the other soundtracks on this list, but it is absolutely worth a listen if you like hummable melodies in your soundtracks. If you like more of a world building thing, we're going to get to more of those later. But this is hummable, listenable melodies that you could listen to the soundtrack away from the medium in which, it was created, and it is just a fantastic listening experience. So I figured I would highlight that on this list. Now, I would say it's interesting because Coraline is probably one that might be closer to its source material or closer to the film as kind of reacting to the subtle changes that the plot and the themes and the characters, whereas Gone with the Wind kind of just hits you over the head with some great themes. So I would say it's a different approach to scoring, which kind of sets it. It's harder to compare the two. But if I had to kind of change, if I had to put this anywhere, Gone with the Wind, I'd probably put at the top of A. So I'd probably put it above Coraline for that reason. Is just like as an album, you could listen to it and you could really enjoy it. So that is going to be Gone with the Wind. And let's go to next. Let's see. I was going to see if I should skip around, but I think I'm going to actually just go in order for now, because it's kind of nice to jump to different time periods, actually. And you can kind of see how scoring has changed over the different time periods, because, like, back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, scoring was much more of a thematic based approach, right? You were using orchestra mainly, maybe some other instruments, but there was no real electronic instruments yet. And so a lot of the scores were more traditional, and they didn't necessarily react to the picture in the same way that, you know, scores do now. At that time, if something crazy was happening on screen or like something bad was happening on screen, there would be music that reflected that. Whereas now, I think scoring is much more on subtext. What's the character going through? Like, it's not necessarily what's happening on screen, but what is the character experiencing internally? So that might be another way of scoring. Um, so now going on to Doctor No, which was the first James Bond film. This is a score done by John Barry, the very famous, James Bond theme. I don't think one could overstate, just how influential this was when it came out. And it's kind of changed the world of scoring. You had the Max Steiners and people like that, and this was a very transitional score into what became modern film scoring and one of the most recognizable themes in the history of film. And so, as a theme and as a score that really exemplifies James Bond character, I would say this would probably go for me. It's hard to say because you could talk about influence, you could talk about also personal likes, and I'm trying to kind of factor all of these into this as I talk about it. But if I had to choose, I would say probably above Gone with the Wind. Would I put it in the S tier? That the theme is just so iconic. I think I have to put it in S tier for that reason. I'm gonna put it in S tier for now. We're gonna keep moving these around as we go. So we've had some pretty heavy hitters right off the bat, right? I wish I could say the same thing with Sherlock Holmes. I'm not saying that it's a bad score. I think it does justice to Hans Zimmer and his team did justice to the modern kind of sheen that they're trying to put on Sherlock Holmes. And from that standpoint, it's great. As a world building score, it was good. Is it mind blowing? No, I don't think so. I think it sounded like a score that other composers could have done, if that makes sense. And it's like when you listen to some iconic scores, you know which composer's voice is in it. I did not feel the same way with Sherlock Holmes. It felt like a substitute score that, a lot of people could have done. So for that reason, I'm going to put it in the C tier. It's not bad by any means, but I don't think it was mind blowing. I don't think it necessarily is up there with some of the best scores. So I'm going to put it in C for now. So Twilight. I have not read the books, so I can't really speak on that aspect of it, but I have seen the film. I saw the first two films. I'm just not really a fan of I think it was Carter Burwell who did this one. Let me double check before I make a mistake here. It was Yep, Carter Burwell. So fantastic composer. I just don't really feel like the score did justice to the world building necessarily. It was kind of a little bit more heavy-handed and on the nose. I kind of liked it less than Sherlock Holmes, so I am unfortunately going to put this in the D tier. Not to denigrate Carter Burwell, who's a fantastic composer in his own right, but it just didn't do it for me, honestly. So I'm going to put it in D tier for now. Now, switching gears again, back to traditional scoring, and I really feel like this is one of John Williams' greats. I read Jurassic Park when I was younger, and I would love to revisit it again and see, kind of how it compares to the movie, because I remember seeing the movie in the theaters when it first came out, and I was blown away by the way both Steven Spielberg and also John Williams captured not dinosaurs attack, right? But rather the sense of wonder, the sense of like life finding a way despite the circumstances. The idea of like just because we could doesn't mean we should. And just the like awesome power of these majestic creatures. Jurassic Park is one of the all-time greatest scores in my opinion, and I think it does justice to both the source material, which is very different in the film, and also capturing the sense of wonder that you feel, in the film itself. So I'm going to put this top of S tier. This is one of the goats, one of the greatest of all time soundtracks for sure by John Williams. Um, and I think it marked a turning point for him personally because you had, Jaws, Star Wars, Superman, E.T., a lot of the Indiana Jones, a lot of the classic kind of film score sounds, and Jurassic Park I would put in that category. In the 90s, he kind of started branching out and doing some other stuff. He did Minority Report. He did a couple of others that, one of which I'm going to feature on this list. But, I feel like Jurassic Park was kind of the last of that first era of his work, and it really is just a fantastic score. Highly recommend you watch the movies and listen to the score in the films or the TV shows. And then you just sit and listen to the album as a listening experience away from picture because oftentimes what they do in soundtracks is they remix the soundtrack for the album. So what happens is they go through an editorial process because you hear fragments of music in the film and it serves the film, right? It serves a medium, but it doesn't necessarily serve a listening experience. So they go in, they re-edit the music, they kind of combine maybe tracks that were featured in the film and stuff like that, and try to make it more of a playable, listenable experience. So, highly recommend if you like these scores in the movie or in the TV show, definitely check out the score away from picture, maybe while reading the book or something. I think that would be a really fun way to experience those books. And also, I've done that before on some of these, and I've loved the experience. So I highly recommend you check that out if you haven't already. But moving right along, we're going to go with next a modern score, and that is It. This was Benjamin Wallfish, fantastic composer as well. Now, this captures, I feel like, a few things really well about the book and the film. Is it captures the sense of the Losers Club. It captures a sense of wonder, of childlike wonder, and how that wonder is stolen away, that innocence is stolen away by this malevolent Pennywise. And I think Benjamin Wallfish really captures that well. And he also captures the absolutely frightening, the terrifying Pennywise sequences in the film, and it feels like something that you could imagine in the book. Now, one thing I do take issue with in the film was that they kind of changed the time period. It used to be the 50s to the 80s, right? In the book, there's the two time periods of when the kids, are when they're kids and then when they're older. And then in the film, they changed it to the 80s to kind of mimic the Stranger Things feel and the modern day. So, I feel like it feels like a modern score. It feels like it also has melodic sequences that harken back to the old school kind of way of scoring. If you'd seen an 80s film, say an 80s horror film, kind of mimics that. I don't feel necessarily that it was a standout score. I don't feel like necessarily there were themes that you're going to be kind of listening to away from picture as much. But it is definitely a fun soundtrack to listen to. I would say probably this is a good B tier soundtrack. It's good. It's definitely worth your listen, but I don't think it's going to necessarily blow minds. But it does do justice to the book. It does do justice to the film. So moving right along, Silence of the Lambs. So I have seen the film. I haven't read the book yet, but if you have, let me know in the comments because I kind of want to know more books I should be moving up on my TBR. So Silence of the Lambs is just a fantastic, menacing score. You really feel like, Hannibal Lecter is a scary villain, not because he's just a cannibal, right? He is extremely intelligent. He's cold. He's calculating. He's always two steps ahead of everybody else, right? And the score in this movie really captures that essence of Hannibal Lecter, I think. And the cat and mouse game he plays with Jodie Foster's character. I can't remember her name in the film, but I think this is just a fantastic score. Would I say it is an A tier score? Probably not necessarily, but it does have a fantastic main theme. And it can be listened to away from the book, presumably, and also the film. So I would put it above it for sure, top of B tier for now. Rings of Power. So, I was going to go with Rings of Power. Let's actually first start with, where did it go? Lord of the Rings. Okay. because I kind of want to make some comparisons between the two because I know they're kind of hard to compare, but I think it's worth the comparison since they're in the same universe. Now, Howard Shore is probably one of the greatest composers of all time. This is the score for me personally that got me into film scoring. This is what I listened to in the theaters. I've listened to it away from picture, and this score is genius because it is chock full of themes. It can be listened to in the films and enjoyed. It can be listened to away from the films and enjoyed. It has kind of transcended the medium. It's become a part of pop culture. It does what the films do really well, which is kind of make the books, it kind of like gives it a little bit more of a gritty sheen to the music and to the film as a world building thing. I think it's slightly different to the books, but I think that this could be listened to, while reading the books, and it can also be listened to while watching the films and away from the film. So I think it kind of achieves all three. And I think this is like one of the greatest of all time, if not the greatest of all time, as far as book adaptation soundtracks. So I'm going to put it top of S tier, even better than Jurassic Park for me personally. I know that's arguable for some, but I'm just going to put it up there because if you haven't heard it, what are you doing with your life? Definitely check it out. Like, stop this video right now and listen to the soundtrack. Very worth your time. And the extended editions are even longer. He wrote like basically like 12 hours of music for those three films. It's absurd. And it's all just wonderful. It's magic, magic. So now let's go to Rings of Power. So Bear McCreary did the score for this for the TV show, the Amazon Studios TV series. Now, say what you will about the series, but I will say I thought that this really made a conscious effort to try to capture the magic of the world of Tolkien. And I thought it was also chock full of themes. I thought Bear McCreary did a fabulous job of it. I don't think, obviously, that it matches up to Howard Shore's stupendous score for the original trilogy, but Howard Shore did do a main theme for Rings of Power. I don't think honestly that it was as good as any of the stuff he did for the original trilogy, but I think it was a fantastic score. Would I put it above Gone with the Wind? Definitely not. Would I put it above Coraline? Probably not. But I would put it in the A category because I think it's just a fantastic score and it definitely deserves a listen if you haven't heard it. I know the show gets a lot of flack, but definitely don't sleep on the score because it is fantastic. Um, okay, now his Dark Materials, I'm going to be a little biased because I worked on season three, but I'm speaking strictly of the books, of Lorne Balfe's themes, and kind of the ability to weave through the show and do justice to the characters. And I feel like these are some of Lorne's best themes he's ever written. It was a joy to be able to work on that season and be able to kind of weave some of these themes throughout the culmination of that show and the culmination of the final book in the trilogy. And I gotta say, like, this is some of the most thematic scoring that has been there in on TV in recent years. And I highly recommend you check out all three albums are equally good. I think they really capture the story and the essence of the characters. So I'm going to put this definitely above Rings of Power. I would say even above Coraline. I think like for the sheer magnificent themes, the main theme in itself is just god tier. And a lot of the character themes are fantastic as well. So I'm gonna put I don't know, I just couldn't put it above Gone with the Wind. I don't know. That's a tough one. I'm gonna put it at the top of A though, right behind Gone with the Wind though. I think it's definitely worth a listen. Again, some of these modern soundtracks, I think like there's so many adaptations that come out now that they don't get enough love. So definitely check these out if you haven't. Harry Potter, come on. I mean, like Hedwig's theme, like need I say more? And of course, John Williams, greatest of all time in my opinion. So again, just like memorable world building is just fantastic. Great to listen to while reading the books, mind you. If you haven't done that, I've done that on rereads, and it's just a blast. He captures the magical essence of J.K. Rowling's world and the characters and does justice to the films. And I kind of picked The Prisoner of Azkaban, the third film and the third book, as his best, score in that. I think he did the first three movies, and then someone else took over for the fourth one. I can't remember their name. Oh God, I think it was an Irish composer. I'll remember after I film this video. But Harry Potter, one of the greatest of all time. Where would I put it though? Would I put it above Jurassic Park? That's a tough one. I love both so equally. I would say Jurassic Park captured my heart as a kid. So I would say for that reason, Harry Potter would be just behind Jurassic Park for me, but I think it's just a great score. Um, Narnia. So, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. and now I'm gonna forget the composer who did this. I'm quickly looking it up. Lion the Witch, the Wardrobe, soundtrack. Let's see here. It was done by hmm. Oh, Harry Gregson Williams. Great. So Narnia, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was done by Harry Gregson Williams. I thought it was a decent score, but not really that memorable, honestly. I like Harry Gregson Williams. I think he does a fabulous job with almost every score he's done. I feel like it does help with the world building. It does capture some of the qualities of Narnia. I really enjoyed reading the series by C.S. Lewis, but I think it's a little bit more adult, if that makes sense, and it kind of reflects the darker tone of the films. But I don't think that it was necessarily anything memorable. I would honestly probably put it even behind Sherlock Holmes. I really don't think it wasn't quite as bad as Twilight, but I don't think it really did anything. It's fun to listen to good background music, I think. And if you disagree, let me know in the comments as well, because I would love to know what your thoughts are. And I always like to make this a dialogue rather than me just talking at you about this stuff. So that was that one. Okay, getting back to the A team here. 2001: A Space Odyssey was very interesting because a guy named Alex North did the score for it originally, and it sounds very much kind of Lost in Spacey '60s kind of score. And it was a good score, but it definitely doesn't do justice to the epic scope of Stanley Kubrick's vision for the book. So, he ended up replacing it with like Richard Strauss, and like all these, classical composers and stuff. Blue Danube Waltz is a huge one in it. I think it's called like Zarathustra or something like that. That's like one of the famous da ba 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 ba. If you remember that. And I think that the music in this is just phenomenal. I highly recommend you check it out. Again, away from the picture, if you haven't heard it, or even with the film. And definitely worth a read and to listen to it as well. So I would put this one. This is tough because it's kind of a funny. Is it better than Jurassic Park though? See, this is where it gets really difficult. I think Jurassic Park I would have to put above because it was bespoke music that was made for the film, whereas 2001: Space Odyssey was music that functioned really well in the context of the film, if that makes sense. But really, really great, engaging soundtrack. Okay, getting back to the slumps here. The Dark Tower was a film that came out in, I think, 2017, and it attempted to basically condense 7 books into one film. What could go wrong, right? And I think the soundtrack did about as justice to the world as the film did. What that means is the soundtrack, I think it was by Junkie XL, who did the Mad Max movies, for instance. Um, he did a good job at capturing the tone of the film, but the film has nothing to do with the book. And it was just kind of a mid soundtrack. So I'm going to put this one in D because I just hate what they did with this adaptation, and the soundtrack is not that great either. So I hate to be mean. I'm not trying to be mean here. I just feel like it just didn't do justice to the film or the books. So now getting back to something positive, Carrie. I think Pino Donaggio did a fantastic job with this. He captures the sense of grief we feel for Carrie's plight and for the horrifying kind of like her horrifying experiences with her mother, her religiously devout mother. I think the mother's theme and Carrie's theme are both just like beautiful, like hauntingly beautiful. So I would put this in the S tier for me personally, but below Doctor No, not for enjoyment's sake, but probably just because of influence. I would say it belongs in the S tier though. Silo. So this was a soundtrack that was done for Wool, the Wool omnibus, which came out by Hugh Howey, and I love the series. And so I was interested to see the adaptation. I thought the adaptation actually did justice to the book pretty well. That first season. I would say though the soundtrack was very mid. I don't think it really captured again, it's one of those that's like it could have been done by any composer. It didn't feel like, wow, this is really planting its flag and creating a unique vision for the world building. So I would say it was fine. I think it was less than it. Maybe I would put it at the top of C. I think it was better than Sherlock Holmes and Narnia, but I don't think, much more than that. I would say similar to Series of Unfortunate Events. I think it was a beautiful soundtrack. I think it was better than Silo. And I think it captured the sense of the books, which I have read the books, and also the film, the one with Jim Carrey in it. I thought it did a really good job at that. I don't think that it necessarily moved the needle in terms of memorable themes, but it captured the world really well. So I'd put it behind it. So it'd be in B, kind of mid tier in the middle there. Okay, Life of Pi. This is one of the most underrated book adaptation soundtracks I think of all time. It came out in 2012. It was done by Michael Dana, and he has an Indian wife actually, and so he really had studied Indian music, and he found a brilliant way to combine Indian music with a Western cinematic palette. It has been really influential to me personally. And it's like oftentimes when you see Indian music in Western music, or music of different cultures in Western music, it almost feels like they're cut and pasted on top because they come from a misinformed place, right? And so that's what calls for fusion. Well, I feel like Michael Dana did such a good job at integration rather than fusion. So it's like you really feel like where does one style end and the other begin? You kind of don't know. And so really, I think this is just a magnificent soundtrack. For me, okay, this is tough. So is it better than Gone with the Wind? Of course not. Um, but does it do for its medium something maybe even better than Gone with the Wind does? And for me, was an even more enjoyable experience to listen to from start to finish away from the film? I would say yes. So I would probably put it top of A tier. Again, it's not going to change lives necessarily, but it is a brilliant soundtrack, and it will be, I think, influential in its own right. Um, oh, this is a fun one. So I don't know if you have all read the Dexter series, Darkly Dreaming Dexter. I think is the first book. Very different to the series in the plot because some things in season 7 of the TV show take place in the first book. So it's pretty wild in that sense. But man, this soundtrack captures Daniel Licht, I think, was the composer of this, the late great Daniel Licht. And I had the opportunity to meet him at a composer event when I first moved to LA. Lovely guy and just a super talented composer. Talk about making themes that stand on their own. I think Dexter has some of the most enduring themes that both capture the books and also the TV show, even though they're different. And it's very rare when you can have a score that can capture even one of those, let alone both when they're so different. So I would say Dexter, this would be probably top of A, maybe? Or would it be S tier? Kind of really hits home, I think. I would probably put it at the bottom of S tier because I think it's like it just captures the world so well, captures the characters so well. There's a playfulness and a darkness at the same time. It is both one of the most heartbreakingly poignant and kind of harrowing scores, and then it's also kind of funny at the same time. I think he does a really good job with both themes. One Piece. So this was the TV show adaptation. And I think the composers for this particular one, again, they capture the playfulness and also the sense of a grand adventure. And the themes are fantastic. Please don't sleep on this if you haven't heard it. The progressiveness of it as well. It's like just crazy rhythmic patterns and things like that. The percussionist, whoever played percussion on this is just wonderful. So highly recommend you check this one out. I would probably put this at I think as a score that really tries to do heavy lifting, it's right behind Rings of Power for me. Maybe it's even higher than Rings of Power. I'm gonna think about that one and we'll assess it at the end. Um, Clockwork Orange. Okay. So Wendy Carlos is one of the premier composers of the synthesizer era and kind of introduced, synthesizers into film scoring in a way that had not been done before. And I think Clockwork Orange is the perfect example of that. The way she captures the world building of Stanley Kubrick's magnificent and haunting film is like I've never heard a score like this, and I still think it stands up to this day as being unique. And it was done like over 50 years ago, and somehow it still feels the sounds feel dated, but the score feels fresh. That makes sense. So I would say I'm going to put this in S tier. Definitely going to put this above Carrie. Yeah, I'm probably going to put it just behind Dr. No because, again, James Bond, so influential. But highly recommend you check this score out if you haven't heard it. Dune. What a score. Now, Dunes by Hans Zimmer, I don't know that I would say it's his best score personally for me because, I love melodies, I love themes in my scores personally. But as I've read the book and I have watched the films, and as far as doing justice to both mediums, fabulous. I mean, he really makes you feel in the world of Arrakis, He really makes you feel like you're kind of a speck of sand in this grand world. And unique tones and the way he creates world building through music and through that percussion intro and that incredible visceral vocal. Definitely you gotta listen to this one. And I think he had released, if I remember correctly, like a sketches album or something like that, which was like a few hours long of stuff that was used in the film and stuff that wasn't used in the film. So definitely check this one out. Don't sleep on this. For me personally, I would probably put it at the top of A, just for pure enjoyment's sake. I love it. I think it's great. I don't think it's his best work, but I think it's fantastic. Worth a listen. The Witcher. So this was done, I think like one of the seasons was done by the same people who did One Piece. Um, and I think it captures Geralt's and the world of The Witcher so well. I think it captures both the book. I read the first book, I think, and I watched the first season of The Witcher. I think it captures both really well. I would probably put it behind One Piece. I would probably put it actually. I'd probably put it at the top of B, because I think the themes are good, but it's not quite the heights of One Piece. I think One Piece they outdid themselves on that score. So definitely check it out. It's worth a listen while you're reading the book, or just if you want to have some good music playing in the background. Definitely worth a listen. Now, The Shining. I think this is one of the most influential scores in the horror genre, and its use of the Penderecki technique on the strings. That is something you didn't see as much in horror before that, and so Kubrick's is very different to the book. I don't know necessarily you could say the score does justice to the book, but it definitely does justice to the film, and it's iconic. Would I say it's greater than Clockwork Orange? That's really the question. Oh, it's hard to say. I think Clockwork Orange is probably more unique, so I would probably put it just behind Clockwork Orange. But I think it is a fantastic score, worth a listen, and it really paints like Kubrick's vision, in a visceral, haunting way. Um, oh, Anna Karenina. So this was by Dario Marianelli. What a score! So I was listening to this again this morning in preparation for this video, and themes after themes after themes. Dario like hammers that theme in through various variations throughout the album. Just a fantastic album. You got to listen to it. You got to listen to it away from picture because you really start to kind of hear more that's going on in the music than you can actually see to picture. So I highly recommend it. I haven't actually read this book, so let me know in the comments if it's worth a read. Maybe it's worth listening to as you read it. But fantastic album. Where would I put it? Probably in A. I think it does a satisfactory job of capturing, the character from what I understand of Anna Karenina. I would probably put it just behind One Piece in terms of thematic, the themes. I really love the themes in One Piece, so gonna put it there for now. Now, Dresden Files. I felt like the show was not that great, personally. I don't think it did justice to Jim Butcher's vision. I think the soundtrack I felt very similarly. I would probably put this. Uh, it's definitely better than Dark Tower. I'll probably put it here, for now. Shogun. So this was the new soundtrack to the new TV series. So I recently read the book. I've recently watched a few episodes of the TV series. So how does it compare? It's interesting because I think it doesn't necessarily capture the time period in the same way because it's using a lot of modern scoring techniques. Now, does that work well in the context of the show? Absolutely. Does it work well in the context of the book? I think there could have been something more grand and sweeping. Not just because I like melody, but because I think it could have actually captured the fish out of water feeling rather than just the tension that happens between these different characters throughout the course of the book and then also throughout the course of the show. So I feel like it was good. I don't think it was mind blowing. I don't think it belongs higher than any of these. I would probably put this. It was good. It was satisfactory. I think probably behind Series of Unfortunate Events. I'd probably put it in the B tier. All right, so moving right along, I love Ramin Djawadi's work. He did, of course, the Game of Thrones. He has done what's it called? House of the Dragon. He's done Westworld, and he has also done Three Body Problem. So Three Body Problem are, the books that it's based on. Remembrance of Earth's Past by Cixin Liu, I think, are some of the greatest sci-fi books ever written. That's my personal opinion. I thought the show actually did justice to the books in that, it feels almost unfilmable, and they were able to kind of keep it cohesive. They changed things to fit the format of the show, but I actually felt like those changes were warranted. Where does the score compare? I think the score was just okay, honestly. I don't think it was anything that great. I personally even liked Silo and Sherlock Holmes more than Three Body Problem score. I felt like it was very forgettable. I don't think there was any themes that made you feel like, wow, this feels like the Three Body Problem. I would probably put it behind Narnia even. Not quite as bad as Dark Tower, Dresden Files, and Twilight, but I don't think it was anything rememberable, I guess. Memorable. So that's where I'm leaving that. Now, here's another biased pick, The Wheel of Time. So I worked on season 2, and I got to hear the music evolve throughout the show. And because Lauren had made me the project lead for season 2, I actually got to help craft the sound of the show. So I'm going to be biased when I say this, but I think the themes in this are not quite the heights of Lauren in his Dark Materials, but I think the themes are fantastic. I think, like, every character theme he has is just unique and different and fresh, and it has Cajun influences, it has orchestral influences, but not traditional orchestral influences. Rather than big orchestras, there's like solo cello or something like that. Kind of interesting, very gritty. It matches the tone of the show. I don't think it matches the tone of the books, but that's okay because it did what it set out to do, which was match the tone of the show. Where would I put this? I would probably put this behind Coraline, because I think Coraline is just melodically a fantastic score. I'd probably put it in A though. I personally speaking, I would love to know if you feel differently and why. I love having conversations of stuff, even if we disagree. So just let me know in the comments. But that's kind of where I'm thinking of putting it there. Now, ending on a high note. Come on, Game of Thrones, one of the most memorable, melodies in TV show history. And although the show kind of started tanking later on, I feel like Ramin Djawadi never let his foot off the gas. He really kept writing great music to the very end. And this is one of those rare albums that really feels like it captures both the books, Song of Ice and Fire by George R. R. Martin, and of course the show. And for that reason, I'm going to put it in the S tier. I personally think it is influential in the modern day, like probably James Bond was in the 60s. I'm going to put it here. Not quite the heights of Harry Potter, but damn well close. I mean, it is again transcended its medium and become a part of pop culture. So I'm going to put it there. So that concludes my giant tier list of some of the most influential and also some of the duds of book to film and TV soundtracks, and kind of how they did justice to both the source material and also the film or TV show for which they were written for. And I just really appreciate you going on this journey with me, because I'm really passionate about music as it pertains to this stuff. I've had the, tremendous blessing of being able to work on some of these adaptations. I pitched for some other adaptations, and it's something that I really enjoy doing, because, writing for a show or for a film where you have to kind of be responsible for helping to craft the musical world building and the themes and the characters, reading the books is a really helpful way to do that. So oftentimes, like before I worked on The Wheel of Time, I read the whole series, before I worked on his Dark Materials, I read the series. So it was really nice to be able to come from an informed place. And I love to see this confluence of like books and music and media all combined into one medium. So thanks so much for bearing with my ramblings about gushing about these different soundtracks and everything. I'm Nikhil with Shelf-Esteem. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments what you think of my picks, and if you disagree or agree. I would love to hear from you, and I'd love to keep this a dialogue always. So thank you for watching. Be good to yourselves, be good to each other. I'll see you on the next video. Take care.